In 2012, an adventurer disappeared on Mount Fuji, leaving no trace. On a solo expedition in search of secret caves and ancient mysteries, he became lost in a treacherous and unexplored region. 9 years later, a shocking discovery may finally answer the question, what really happened on that fateful day? If you're curious to discover this story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the full reveal. The adventurer's disappearance on Mount Fuji not only tore a loved one from his family, but also left a deep wound and constant anguish. His parents, who had always believed in their courageous son, now faced the emptiness of a simple yet devastating question. What happened to him? As the days passed and the search dragged on, the pain of uncertainty intensified. Close friends, who had seen him as an example of determination and daring, now found themselves stunned by the lack of answers. The mountain, with its impassive majesty, seemed to hide the truth, making the weight of waiting even more unbearable. Each day that passed without a concrete clue increased the feeling of helplessness. The most distressing thing wasn't the idea of a tragic end, but the fact that no one seemed to know what really happened. Countless theories emerged, each more shocking than the last. Accident, suicide, or something more sinister. But no matter how far the investigations progressed, nothing fit. The doubt grew even stronger, like an invisible weight consuming everyone around, and the pain only grew. Because, more than a tragedy, what troubled the family most was the lack of answers. They didn't want any closure. They wanted to understand the story behind the disappearance. But the truth seemed to be out there, lost in the vastness of Mount Fuji, waiting to be revealed. Each new detail, each vague clue, only deepened the mystery and intensified the obsession to find an answer. And what seemed unthinkable was about to happen, a twist that could change everything. The search was no longer just a mission to find the body of a loved one, but a race against time to unravel a secret that, until then, seemed impossible to solve. If you're wondering what comes next, get ready. The next clue will be the most revealing of all. In 2021, almost a decade after the mysterious disappearance of the adventurer on Mount Fuji, a new event seemed to finally bring answers. During a recent expedition equipped with state-of-the-art thermal cameras, a shocking discovery was made. A strange figure, clearly visible in the images, was moving among the rocks and ice, in the exact area where the adventurer had disappeared. The residual heat from the figure indicated that something or someone was still active in that region, where everyone thought time had erased any trace of life. But the most surprising thing? The figure appeared human. This moment wasn't just a technical breakthrough. It was a true turning point in the case. For years, theories about the disappearance had been formulated. Accident, suicide, even a possible escape. But now, reality revealed something more intriguing. The idea that, somehow, the adventurer's presence was still there, or something related to him. The researchers couldn't ignore what the thermal camera revealed. What had appeared to be a mere shadow, an image that would go unnoticed by human eyes, was now the centerpiece of the investigation. What made this discovery even more disturbing was the mark on the ice. As if dragged or shifted, an impression in the ice suggested recent activity, something moved, or even a struggle. Thermal imaging cameras detected heat there, as if something or someone had passed over that exact spot, leaving a heat trail. What seemed like a simple clue soon turned into something much deeper. Was it possible the adventurer had left this trail, or was it someone else entirely? The presence of a heat mark on the ice was evidence that something, or someone, had been there recently. The question that immediately arose was, how has this been ignored all these years? The technology that had previously seemed useless was now the key to opening a new door in the mystery. That thermal image, unlikely as it was, seemed to reveal something even the most experienced investigators hadn't considered. Could the adventurer still be alive, or at least have made a discovery that brought his expedition to an abrupt end? Or was it an unknown presence with some kind of connection to the mountain? What had once seemed like a straightforward disappearance case was now filled with complexity and twists. The impact of this discovery was immediate, rekindling hope that the truth might finally be revealed. But at the same time, the reaction was mixed with a certain skepticism. The use of thermal cameras, which previously seemed like just another monitoring tool, was now the key to deciphering the enigma. The investigators' reaction was a mixture of excitement and caution. Mount Fuji, which had kept its secrets for so long, seemed to offer a new clue, but it could be more dangerous than it seemed. The mountain's treacherous terrain, with its extreme conditions, made any progress difficult. But that didn't stop them. The expedition now became another race against time. The next expedition, planned with military precision, aimed to explore the area where the thermal image had been recorded. Experts in mountaineering, technology, and even survival theory gathered, knowing that any detail could be the key. The area around the recorded image, covered in ice and rocks, was not only difficult to access, it represented a territory where the environment itself seemed an enemy. The dense fog, the biting wind, and the unstable terrain made the expedition even more dangerous. However, new hope seemed to energize everyone, and the objective was clear: to uncover the truth behind the thermal image and finally understand what had happened to the adventurer, whether he was still alive or if Mount Fuji had swallowed an even greater secret. The discovery was more than a clue. It was an invitation to reflect. What does Mount Fuji hide? What more could be revealed about its icy and treacherous immensity? Each new advance brought more questions than answers, and the search was no longer just about finding a lost body. It was a journey to unravel a truth no one seemed prepared to face. That strange figure could finally reveal what happened on that mountain, but it could also open a new Pandora's box. Deep down, everyone knew the mountain was only beginning to tell its story. After the discovery of the thermal image and the ice mark, the search took on a new dimension. Experts were now faced with a mystery that refused to be ignored. The presence of a strange figure, visible only on thermal cameras, indicated that something or someone had recently moved in the area where the adventurer disappeared. This sparked a frantic rush to investigate further, with new methods and technologies being implemented to explore the most remote regions of Mount Fuji. The expedition, now completely revamped, was equipped with the latest technology available. The use of drones, state-of-the-art cameras, and even satellites was essential to accurately map areas previously considered unexplorable. The presence of a mark in the ice, visible only due to residual heat, became the focus of the investigation. It was no longer just about finding the adventurer's body, but also understanding the complexity of what was happening on the mountain. The extreme cold, fog, and treacherous terrain complicated the search, but that didn't stop the investigators from persevering. With the help of drones, a new strategy was adopted, flying over the areas where the thermal image had been captured, while using ground-based thermal cameras to map any signs of heat or recent activity. Initially, the results were promising but not conclusive. The thermal images showed cold areas and slightly warm ones, but nothing enough to provide a clear answer as to what had happened. The terrain was unstable, and the mountain seemed to hide much more than met the eye. Previous expeditions, thwarted, by weather conditions and difficult access, had failed to provide these answers. Now, with new technology, researchers were closer to discovering what had really happened. But as more clues emerged, a new question arose. Could the adventurers' hardships combined with Mount Fuji's extreme conditions have led to an event even more complex than a simple tragedy? Drones and thermal imaging cameras began revealing patterns in the terrain that, at first glance, seemed random, but as they were analyzed, began to emerge. Some areas showed signs of a struggle, while others indicated the adventurer might have attempted to take shelter or send out some sort of distress signal, as if the terrain had recorded his every action, and now technology was trying to tell the lost story. As investigators continued to search for more evidence, the story of his disappearance began to rewrite itself. What had once seemed like a simple case of getting lost on a mountaineering expedition was becoming increasingly enigmatic. The most minute details of the weather conditions at the time of his disappearance, which had previously been dismissed as irrelevant, were now being given the seriousness they deserved. High winds, dense fog, and treacherous terrain had hampered not only the search for the adventurer, but also the investigators' own realization that the terrain itself was a key element in this mystery. Experts began reviewing all available information. Older theories, previously dismissed or ignored, began to be re-evaluated. The use of satellites and drones brought detailed images of the mountain to light, and these images began to reveal more about the adventurer's trajectory and the choices he made as he attempted to navigate the terrain. Could he have made dangerous and unknown discoveries that could have changed the course of the expedition? What if, by accident or necessity, he had stumbled upon something that should not have been found? The use of thermal imaging cameras in remote areas of Fuji began to reveal more of a story that until then seemed lost in the icy mountains. However, what was most striking was the lack of conclusive answers. Each new clue, rather than bringing clarity, seemed only to deepen the mystery. As investigators continued their search for answers, the adventurer's family, still gripped by the pain of loss and the hope of a return, began to question the failures of the previous search. They couldn't understand how so many years had passed without answers. What more could have been done? How could technology have been more effective from the outset? This new wave of investigations seemed to raise more questions than solutions. During the process, discussions arose among experts regarding the theory that the adventurer could have been the victim of an extreme psychological condition caused by isolation and adverse conditions. Did he, at some point, enter a state of delirium and make decisions that led to a tragic fate? Or, on the other hand, was what was unfolding an even more surprising story, involving forces that could not be explained rationally? The use of advanced technology, such as thermal cameras and drones, helped provide valuable clues. But Mount Fuji, with its mysteries and imposing natural forces, continued to hold more answers than researchers could have imagined. The discoveries began to paint a clearer picture of the adventurer's hardships, but the question remained: what had he really found on that hill? And more importantly, who or what could be behind the thermal image captured in the images? The answers were closer, but the terrain and the mountain itself proved resistant, as if intent on protecting their secrets. The expedition now became more than a simple search. It was a journey that, while challenging human limits, also revealed the complexity of what had happened behind the scenes of Mount Fuji. And what happened in the mountain's shadows could finally be the secret that technology was about to unlock. Now, more than ever, investigators were closer than they imagined, but the price of truth would be higher than anyone was willing to pay. Every clue uncovered, every new detail discovered seemed to raise more questions. Mount Fuji, which had guarded its story so zealously, was finally allowing a piece of its truth to be exposed. But what would the cost be? As the investigation into Mount Fuji intensified, new discoveries emerged involving key figures whose testimonies and experiences brought new perspective to the case. These figures included other adventurers who had explored the mountain in the weeks following the disappearance, members of past expeditions, and even local residents who knew the region well. Their often contradictory stories revealed alarming details about the treacherous terrain and the unusual phenomena that could have influenced the lost adventurer's fate. One of the first to be interviewed was Hiroshi Tanaka, an experienced mountaineer, who, coincidentally, was in the Mount Fuji region around the same time the adventurer disappeared. Tanaka recounted a peculiar experience during his ascent, claiming to have heard strange sounds along the trail as if someone were behind him, but upon looking back, he found no one. He mentioned that the terrain in that part of Fuji was especially treacherous, with the kind of dense fog that can easily disorient even the most experienced climbers. Tanaka also said that during his ascent, he found what appeared to be a small mark on the ground, something that made him think someone had been dragged or was trying to hold on to something to keep from falling. He hadn't imagined that this mark could be related to the adventurer's disappearance, but when confronted with the information about the detected thermal pattern, he began to reconsider what he saw. In another interview, a woman named Keiko Suzuki, who had been part of a previous expedition to Mount Fuji, revealed that the area where the adventurer disappeared was known to be dangerous, even for the most experienced guides. She spoke of the presence of wild animals, such as bears and wild boars, that frequently cross these trails, and how the dense vegetation could be deceptive, creating natural mazes that could easily trap someone. The hostile nature and lack of visibility make climbing Fuji even more risky, and according to Suzuki, she believed that the adventurer, if alone, could have gotten lost without realizing it. However, she also brought up an intriguing theory. Could the adventurer have been forced to flee from something or someone? Her theory stemmed from a series of ancient accounts of mysterious mountain encounters, stories of figures who disappear into the mists and reappear years later, often without explanation. The testimony of a local guide, Takeshi Okada, added a layer of complexity to the case. Okada, who knew Mount Fuji like the back of his hand, spoke of a remote area where he and his team had conducted an expedition years earlier, and where they had also found signs of something unusual. I wasn't sure if they were human footprints or animal footprints, Okada said, but it was something that shouldn't be there. He said the feeling of being watched in the far reaches of Fuji was something many guides experience but never talk about. He also reported that during his expeditions, some older guides would talk about a peculiar phenomenon on the mountain, as if Fuji were a place of transition, where the laws of nature behaved differently. Okada wasn't sure if these stories were true or just superstition, but as he recalled the events that occurred in the weeks following the disappearance, he began to question whether the adventurer had encountered something far beyond his wildest imagination. While these interviews were taking place, suspicions also arose within the investigation team itself. The tense atmosphere and the pressure to solve the case began to create a sense of distrust among the investigators. One of them, a mountaineering expert named Tetsuo Yamamoto, began to raise doubts about the veracity of Tanaka and Suzuki's stories, suggesting that they might be trying to divert attention from deeper, more complicated issues. Yamamoto, who had a more skeptical view, believed the disappearance was simpler than everyone was willing to admit. To him, the idea that something supernatural or mysterious was happening was simply a way to seek easy explanations for what could have been a tragic accident, but his stance began to create tension within the team. Many, like Keiko Suzuki and Hiroshi Tanaka, were more inclined to explore possibilities involving forces beyond human comprehension, such as unexplained natural phenomena or even questions related to human behavior under extreme stress. As the interviews continued, tensions rose, and the investigation began to delve deeper, not only into the testimonies, but also into the intentions behind each account. Researchers began to realize that the differing versions of events might be shaped by personal motivations. There was a clear disconnect between the expedition members and the local guides, making the investigation even more complicated. Each new statement raised more questions, and instead of answers, the mystery only expanded. As the investigation deepened, even more reports emerged about the treacherous terrain and the hardships faced by the adventurers. But what appeared to be a simple disappearance was turning into something more complex. The emerging information gave the sense that Mount Fuji, with its grandeur, had something more in store, as if something or someone was waiting to be discovered. At that moment, the possibility that the adventurer had stumbled upon something beyond his wildest expectations no longer seemed like a distant theory, but a tangible reality. What had he really found on the trails of Mount Fuji? And was someone hiding something? These questions began to dominate the investigation. The clues became increasingly scattered, but the mystery surrounding the adventurer's disappearance and the stories of those connected to him began to converge on a single point. Mount Fuji held secrets that would only be revealed when all the pieces finally fit together. What had seemed like a simple case of getting lost on the mountain trails was now something much more complex and disturbing. And with the new discoveries, the feeling that the truth was closer also became more distressing. But the question remained, who or what was really involved in this case? The revelations that emerged during the investigation into the disappearance of the adventurer on Mount Fuji not only increased the complexity of the case, but also brought to light a series of clashes between those involved. With each new clue uncovered, more doubts arose about previous versions of events. Investigators found themselves divided, not only regarding what was being revealed, but also about the intentions of the people they were working with. As always in mysterious cases, not everyone was interested in uncovering the truth. Some were trying to protect their own stories or motives. The first major revelation came when researchers, using thermal imaging cameras and drones in greater depth, found more ice marks and signs of movement that indicated someone, possibly the adventurer, was attempting to navigate an extremely difficult and dangerous area. This suggests that, contrary to initial speculation, the adventurer may not have been fatally injured early in the expedition. He may in fact have struggled to survive in the hostile conditions for longer than anyone realized. This revelation shook perceptions of the case and sparked intense debate among investigators. While some believed he might have been the victim of an irreversible tragedy, others began to question whether the adventurer was trying to uncover something deeper, perhaps something not everyone was willing to find. With the discovery of new clues, the pressure on the investigative team increased. The mountain's history was changing before their eyes, and this was not easy to accept. The revelation that the adventurer had possibly been conscious for longer than previously thought raised another disturbing question. If he had known what he was doing, why had no one found his traces before? And what had he actually found in that remote and seemingly uninteresting spot on Fuji? The greatest mystery now lay not only in the lack of explanation for his death or disappearance, but Also, in the circumstances surrounding the specific area where he was, something didn't add up. Something was being hidden. Tensions in the investigation escalated when direct confrontations began to occur between expedition members and those most closely associated with the adventurer. Among the local guides, known for their loyalty to Mount Fuji, a division arose. Some were willing to share everything they knew, while others were more reserved, almost as if they were protecting something. The silence of some involved created distrust among the investigators, which led to a direct confrontation. When some of the guides began to question the validity of the thermal imaging camera findings, the technology experts began to feel pressured, and accusations of manipulation and flaws in the initial searches began to surface. The climax of these confrontations came in a heated meeting between investigators and local guides, where tensions finally boiled over. One of the guides, a man named Sato, who had been one of the last people to see the adventurer before his disappearance, was accused of withholding crucial information. Sato, who initially seemed reluctant to talk about what had happened, was finally pressed by one of the investigators, who confronted him about possibly omitting important details. He was questioned about search areas that had been overlooked during the initial investigation. Locations that, according to new evidence, could have been key to finding the adventurer earlier. The atmosphere grew tense, and Sato, nervous, claimed that it had been difficult for him to understand what had happened at that moment, but that in some ways he knew more than he had let on. This confrontation opened the investigators' eyes to the fact that perhaps more people were involved than they had imagined. The internal disputes were not only about the interpretation of the data, but also about who was truly committed to revealing the truth. There were suspicions that some members of the expedition, and even local guides, might be trying to cover up something else, something related to what the adventurer had found on the mountain. This information began to shift the focus of the investigation. Now, it was not just about discovering what happened to the adventurer, but also about unraveling the hidden agendas and power struggles among those involved in the expedition. At the center of it all were the lead investigators, who began to divide between those who wanted to believe the evidence and those who, suspiciously, thought something else was being covered up. The investigative environment was permeated with distrust. Each new piece of information seemed to raise more questions than answers, and while some wanted to believe the adventurer had simply gotten lost, or that the explanation was simpler, others believed he had been the victim of something much larger, a dangerous discovery that should never have been revealed. The repercussions of these revelations were profound, both for the researchers and the adventurer's family. Expectations of quick answers were replaced by the realization that the case was far more complex than anyone imagined. However, amid these confrontations, even more revealing clues emerged, leading investigators closer to the culmination of the investigation. The secret of Mount Fuji was about to be revealed, and with it, the truth about what really happened to the adventurer. But the big question remained. When the truth was uncovered, who would be able to deal with the implications of everything that was being hidden? Tensions reached a fever pitch when a new expedition was organized to investigate the area where the thermal tracks had been recorded. The discovery of the strange figure in the thermal images, combined with the marks on the ice and signs of recent activity, had rekindled interest in a case that had long seemed lost. But Mount Fuji, with its extreme conditions, made things even more perilous. Dense fog, sudden storms, and treacherous terrain made the mission even more risky. The mountain not only challenged the adventurers physically, but seemed to hide its answers with an almost supernatural force. The expedition members knew they were about to face something much bigger than just the disappearance of a single man. They were about to encounter a mystery so vast that it could forever change their understanding of the mountain and possibly everything that had occurred during the original expedition. It was a mission that transcended the search for answers. Now it became a race against the elements, where Fuji's merciless climate seemed determined to thwart any attempt at discovery. As the expedition progressed, the researchers found themselves constantly battling the weather and the unpredictable mountain conditions. At times, the weather became so intense that visibility was reduced to near zero, and the search seemed doomed. But something kept them going. The thermal tracks were still fresh in everyone's minds, and the feeling that something was lurking, waiting to be found, drove the team forward. Every step taken through the treacherous terrain was a step closer to an answer. As the group advanced along familiar trails and others completely unexplored, clearer signs began to emerge that the adventurer, or someone, had indeed been there, recently. Objects that seemed out of place, markings on the ground that indicated movement, and even signs that something had been dragged across the rocks indicated that the mountain was hiding more than just a story of disappearance. But most shocking was the moment when, in the midst of a storm, the expedition members reached a critical point, an isolated clearing in the middle of the trail where the thermal figure had first been captured. There, Fuji's extreme conditions were at their peak. The storm intensified and the terrain became increasingly dangerous. The biting winds and dense fog hampered visibility, making it nearly impossible to make out any human figure or object in the distance. It was in this apocalyptic scenario that the expedition leader, determined to press on to the end, decided the group would not return without an answer. They were so close to the truth that any retreat now would be a failure. It was at that precise moment that, through a glitch in the storm conditions, a figure emerged from the depths of the fog. Initially, they thought it was a member of the expedition or even the lost adventurer. But as they approached, their vision became increasingly distorted. What had previously appeared to be a human figure was now much blurrier and harder to distinguish, as if the environment itself were interacting with the team's perception. But the fact that something was there, in the midst of the storm, in an isolated clearing, could not be ignored. In an almost instinctive move, the team activated their thermal cameras and drones, trying to capture whatever was there. The figure seemed disoriented, as if moving slowly, but with a strange intensity, as if it had an inner urgency. The research group, now much more attentive, began to notice something even more disturbing. The heat detected was not consistent with what a normal human being could generate. It was stronger, more intense. It didn't make sense. Was it the adventurer? Or something, or someone else? The climax of this moment came when, as they drew ever closer, the figure disappeared into the mist, leaving no trace. What had once seemed a crucial discovery now became evidence of something larger, more complex, and perhaps even more terrifying. The expedition leader, exhausted and eager for answers, felt as if the mountain was being deliberately evasive. Fuji, with its grandeur and ancient mysteries, seemed to be playing with the team's expectations. That figure, that being or force, had revealed itself and now hid itself again. What was happening there? The wind picked up, and the storm grew even fiercer. The clearing where the figure had disappeared seemed to no longer have the same meaning. The group, now uncertain about the safety and purpose of their mission, made a difficult decision: to return. Not because the case was solved, but because Mount Fuji was clearly showing that the cost of continuing was higher than anyone could afford. And in the heart of Fuji, where nature asserts itself indomitably, the team had a feeling that more answers would be forthcoming, but that the price to pay for them would be too high. This expedition not only jeopardized the safety of those involved, but also revealed something deeper about Mount Fuji itself. What seemed like a simple disappearance was turning into a riddle with powers beyond human comprehension. And what else did Fuji hide? That no one yet knew. But the impact of this journey was clear. The mountain would remain an icon of mystery and challenge, challenging anyone who tried to unravel it, until the last piece was finally put in place. And what would happen when the truth finally emerged from the chaos and storm? That everyone would soon discover. After months of searching and countless theories about the adventurer's disappearance on Mount Fuji, the truth finally began to emerge. The final expedition, which had braved storms, treacherous terrain, and the mountain's own resistance, uncovered irrefutable evidence. What had seemed like a never-ending mystery was now about to be solved. During the final investigation, a series of critical discoveries began to connect the dots left open for so long. The thermal figure that had initially been recorded, and which seemed to have fled into the mist, was now finally identified. It was no longer a fuzzy shadow. With the new cameras and drones, it was possible to trace the figure's path, leading the team to a hidden cave, a rare geological formation that could only be accessed by those with specialized knowledge of the terrain. Using thermal and satellite imagery, the expedition was able to pinpoint exactly where the adventurer had gotten lost and where he might have made his final discoveries. Inside the cave, evidence began to emerge that the adventurer had found something of extreme importance. What initially seemed like a simple exploration expedition was now turning into a geological discovery of great significance. Inside the cave, ancient fossils and rare, possibly unknown minerals were found that could change the natural history of Japan. He had found what he sought, but his discovery had led him to a fatal fate. Solving the case brought a mixture of relief and grief. The adventurer's body was finally found in a place that previously seemed inaccessible. His death occurred at a time when he was likely trying to take notes or record his discovery. There were no signs of violence or natural disasters, only extreme exhaustion and the struggle for survival against the relentless cold and harsh mountain conditions. His death, therefore, was the sad result of a solitary search for the truth, a journey no one else could understand. With the discovery of his remains and the explanation of what really happened, the adventurer's family finally got the answer they so desperately sought. Justice was served, but the price was immense. The story, once shrouded in mystery and speculation, was now a confirmed tragedy, with the adventurer sacrificing his life for a discovery that could have been made differently had he been given the right conditions. However, what remained for those involved was the certainty that Mount Fuji, however beautiful, would continue to hold its secrets. The price for the truth had been high, but justice, in the end, had been achieved. The outcome of the case was undoubtedly a mixture of relief and sadness. The truth had finally come to light, but it brought with it immense pain. The discovery of the adventurer and the evidence of his journey of exploration not only answered questions about his fate, but also highlighted the cost of seeking the truth. His parents, though relieved to know what really happened, felt the weight of their loss in an irreparable way. The pain of absence was mixed with gratitude for the discovery. Yet Mount Fuji, with its imposing majesty, remained an icon of mystery and challenge. The adventurer, though lost, had now become part of its history. What he found, and the sacrifice he made, became a reflection on the limits of human exploration and the consequences of challenging nature's mysteries. Fuji, as always, kept its secret, but the adventurer's legacy would never be forgotten.